Hey everyone, you're watching CareMinds podcast. I'm your host Daniel. We're starting a series of summary episodes where we've combined some of the channel's highlights as well as our favorite takes on product management from product managers. Hope you enjoyed this one. Let's get started. What, in your opinion, are the other qualities that define a product manager in any domain?
Yeah, I think the job of product managers is to represent the customer of the product they're building for. So it could be true in a company that's direct to consumer, or it could be true in a company that's B2B. Just the consumer is different. But product managers have to design and build and get everyone to work around an experience that's going to serve the customer. And if it's not built for the end customer who's going to use it, if it's not built for them in mind, it's not going to work. A big piece of that is edge cases. It means, we have an idea of how people will move through the product, but very often people won't move through the product the way we design it, or envision it. So we need to design flows for alternative uses of product. The other thing is, very often as product managers, you'll be asked to build things that are not good ideas, either because someone thinks it could help the business. I had one example where someone on the business side came over to us and said, we need to build this because we need to grow X
Very
part
good
of
call,
the
yeah.
business. And then one of my product managers looked at me and she said, which customer problem is this solving? Have we seen any complaint from customers or any indication that this would be well
Yeah.
received? And the answer was no. Yeah, so we went back and we said we're not doing it. We ended up doing it because we were forced to, and it ended up not performing. Huge shocker there. Um, but the reality is, if there's it, I think, like, just by making it clear that we define strategy based on what will be accepted by the customer, that's already a
Oh, yeah.
success. And if you think about
Yep.
it, in companies, you'll have every part represented at the decision-making table, except for the customer, right? You have the finance people, you have the marketing people, you have, if it's a medical company, the clinicians, but who's representing the customer? And everything's being done for the customer. So the job of product is to sit at the table and to be that customer voice.
Before we continue our episode, let's acknowledge our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by the App Solutions, a healthcare software development company trusted by Google, Red Cross, and InterSystems. If your organization is looking to positively impact software development roadmap, the App Solutions is a great choice. You can delegate your product streams or augment your existing engineering team with qualified specialists. The App Solutions is capable of solving software engineering and interoperability challenges, setting up and maintaining compliant infrastructure, as well as designing and developing machine learning capabilities. If you're interested in learning how the App Solutions might add value to your business, click the link in the description below, mention the CareMinds podcast, and get a free project health check assessment. Now let's get back to the show. What would you say are the kind of like core skills and kind of like initial mindset that could bring value into a company if you're just starting out?
Yeah, I would say there's like three key characteristics: curiosity, skepticism, and empathy.
Why
Curiosity is
skepticism?
like pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Why skepticism?
Yeah.
Because PMs have to say no all the time, right? Like, everybody is going to have a million ideas. And in many cases, people kind of come to you with a particular solution in mind without kind of really understanding the motivation and root cause behind that solution. And in many cases, there are a lot of alternatives to kind of getting to the same place. And yeah, you have limited resources to at your disposal, and you have, many requests from a wide variety of different stakeholders, and just sort of vet and prioritize and understand the motivation behind them. I think that requires like a very significant degree of skepticism because of how often you have to say no. Any good product organization uses data of course, to drive those decisions. I also think that figuring out how to make those prioritization calls in the absence of good data is equally important.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, for example, a client request, right? Like, you have no data necessarily around like what you might have data to back that up, but you might not to necessarily understand how much they care about it. And I think there's some reading between the lines to do that. And, if you're entering into like a new vertical or a new market where you might have external data to help you understand a business case, but you don't necessarily have like data that from your own products and systems. And so I think one of the first questions I got in my first interview, like round of interviews at Oscar, was, have you ever had to make a business case or vet a business case for something where there wasn't a clear ROI, and how did you do that? And I think that like when I had a really clear answer, because that was what I was doing every day at Manifest Medics, which is like, I'm trying to get the state of California to spend tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to stand up a statewide healthcare data network and pass laws requiring that. And, there's some research on and some data on the sort of impact that data sharing can have, but it's not great. And it's really just a matter of sort of making a really clear qualitative case, or these are all of the ways in which this can generate like value in the healthcare system and make it work more efficiently. And so I think, being data driven is super important. And I think that like, any good and skeptical like PM has that skill set. But I think that, really figuring out how to make those prioritization calls in the absence of good data, and having, good ways of storytelling, of kind of vetting in a way that is qualitative and structured is equally important.
You also mentioned empathy, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's also, a cornerstone?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think empathy, just having a really good understanding of the needs of your users and sort of being able to feel like the impact that an experience, good or bad, has on them, I think is super important. And kind of being able to put yourself in those shoes. I think if you can't do that and get that really clear understanding of your user, it's going to be really hard to design for that person and meet their needs.
Can you please finish this sentence? So you can be a product manager, or it would be extremely hard for you to become one if you don't have X qualities. What do you think those qualities are?
So I would say there are a few, so it won't be like a one word. I think prioritization skills are important. The fact that you need to make hard decisions, there's always a trade-off, and you need to be aware of that. Another one is resilience, because you are always like in the nice way, you are always in this like interchange between business, tech, and UX, but you're also being pulled to those different directions. Sometimes you want to serve the business, but you will create tech debt. Sometimes you want to serve tech, but it means that you won't finish deadlines. So you need to make sure that you are resilient to those push from different directions. For me to be like really successful as a PM, you need to be proactive. So a person that is curious and wants to do more and learn more in his or her job is quite important. And having like good kind of like people skills or soft skills to make sure that you manage the stakeholders part, which is one of the most important things. If you are a great product manager to your team, but your stakeholders are not bought into what you do, you're not doing a good job, unfortunately.
What challenges did you face there whilst having that experience, and how did they shape your professional skills?
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. All of that is 100% true. And for me, when I came in to lead this platform migration, it was an interesting time frame because this was also during an M&A activity or merger and acquisition. So not only was I onboarding new employees onto a new technology, but I was learning that myself too with this new platform. And so this shaped my professional skills. By allowing time for questions, and really getting that feedback in. So not just teaching or directing people what to do or giving instructions, but that back and forth kind of bi-directional listening and asking for feedback. I grew up playing sports, and there's a saying among coaches where it's one thing to know the game, right? You know the sport or job duties in this example, but only if you've truly mastered a skill are you able to teach that or coach or train someone. And there are a lot of times when you know what you're doing or why or how you are doing it, but to be able to explain it to someone else is a really invaluable skill to have. There's a great video out there too about how to explain how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And it's really about how to articulate yourself in a way that someone else can understand. So in your head, you know how to make a peanut butter sandwich, right? But it's not just open the jar, spread the peanut butter. Take your dominant hand, place on top of the peanut butter jar lid with light pressure, grip and twist, right? Counterclockwise. And so I still carry that in my presentation skills today when I'm trying to explain something. I remember not everyone knows acronyms or is coming from a place of experience or background knowledge. And so in teaching others how to use this technology platform, I was able to refine my presentation and teaching technique.
To your point, when it comes to differentiating your development team with people with different skills and different perspectives, I'm wondering, what is your take on trusting somebody else's experience whilst also being exposed to a lot of business context? Do you find merging these is kind of like the superpower, or how should like a product manager pursue those two qualities? Should they be worked on independently, or kind of like should a product manager lean on some of them if he feels like it's the best sort of like outcome for a particular situation that he's working on?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's probably a style aspect to this question, but from my vantage point, I sort of think about that in the mindset of it's impossible to build the whole product in a single sprint or in a single time horizon, like it's an eventual evolution of a product. And so I sort of come at it from the perspective of it's impossible to know all of the data inputs and market research and insights that you would want to have at your disposal to make certain decisions. So in a lot of ways, like when you're building or shipping a product, you're trying to get to the most relevant and minimally viable product and release at the door so that you can get meaningful feedback from the consumer, from the customer, and then you can orient from there. I sort of think about data gathering and decision making as a product manager in the same way. You need to acquire enough minimally viable information to get started in a direction and produce an initial design and so on and so forth. But you can definitely overanalyze or over-index and spend too long collecting information, analyzing it from every direction before deciding on a path. So I'm more of a fly it and try it at the same type of a guy, if you will. And so my general proclivity is it's important that I can understand the process that a product manager that I work with or works for me is undergoing, understanding how they're collecting information at the outset, how they're going to collect information during, and how they're going to collect information posthumously to a release. And as long as they can show me a clear plan to do that, I'll back whatever the decision that the data says. If that's what the data says and we can measure that data and shift our plans accordingly, great. But I think where product managers can struggle is not having enough minimal viable data or collecting too much data. And then there's noise in the signal and you can't really decide what you need to be doing. And so I tend to err to, just like in creating a product, collect enough information to have conviction on a direction to start, but then be committed to the delivery and commitment and analysis of information as you're in flight, and then change accordingly.
If I could like sum up the persona or the archetype, sort of like product manager that would fit perfectly into Carrot is either a person who strives towards innovation and is thriving in that environment, or a person who is dealing with lots of complex stuff and ambiguity to a degree, right?
Yeah, and innovation, I probably should have used the different words because they're both innovating. I would go with more engagement focused, like converting and increasing people moving through the system as more of the like front end member experience side of things. And then that more architectural product manager that can really understand like there is a lot of complexity underneath the subsystem of Carrot. And you essentially need to have two hats, an engineer hat and a product manager hat, because software at the end of the day is details. And we really need a certain few of our product managers to get pretty in the weeds to fully understand what they're asking for, what the business is asking for, and unpack it into all of the different splintered out business requirements that need to happen with like I was talking about deductibles earlier, or allow listing categories of merchant types, and how do merchant category codes even work under the hood for credit card systems.
Sometimes it could be a little bit difficult, considering the fact that you can sort of like unconsciously attribute your need to get a response fast to the greater good, which is the development of the product anyways. So how do you do that in a way that you kind of like make people acknowledge stuff, but also do it in a nice way, if it makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely it, right? You think that your stuff is urgent and critical, but you have to keep in mind what everyone else is doing. I usually start with the why, right? And so if things are presented in a way where they understand why it's urgent and critical, and that honestly tends to be either people, process, or technology, or dollars, a lot of times with the financial side. If you approach it in a way to say, here is why this is urgent for me, they're a lot more likely to understand and give you those 5 minutes back, or answer your email right away. If you say, I need this signature by the end of the month because it is $2.5 million and it's critical to the success of our product, right? It's a little bit easier than to say, I need this now, I need this right now, all the time. So giving them the why behind it helps. And that it also helps me manage it too, right? If I can't explain why it's important and urgent, then it probably is something that can wait until tomorrow, or it can wait until Monday. But trying to figure out, usually it's dollars, resources, things like that, that'll move it along pretty quickly.
I was wondering, from your perspective as a product manager in Cerebral, what are your kind of like superhero, I guess, type stories, the motivational ones, the kind of experience that you would always remember as your kind of like highlights in your career?
Yeah, I think at Cerebral, the thing I'll end up walking away with sort of, there were a few things that I came away with that were very important to me. So one was how well product engineering and design work together. It was really, and I didn't even realize how good we have it until I started speaking with other companies and seeing how much of a challenge those relationships are in other places. And I think what made that relationship work well was two factors. Number one, within those things, within those three organizations, there was 100% alignment on what we need to work on. So there wasn't a feeling where, an engineer says, I'm going to prioritize A, and the product person says, no, we need to prioritize B. So we were all moving in the same direction, and there was no conflict about that. And then the second thing that I think is very important that gets missed in other places is the respect and the delineation of responsibility. So engineering has their area of expertise, and that's defining what's the best way from an engineering standpoint to structure and to build a certain thing. And it can be
correct.
They can say this is the best way to build it if you want it fast, but this is the best way to build it if you want it to be a long time. And, you have to let engineering do their piece. Same for design. If design needs to do their research, or if they feel something has to be in a certain way, it's not product's job to say, I don't like the color of this button. Ultimately, design comes in. They have their expertise. They have their copy, and you can ask questions on both sides. But once you start making decisions or making those teams feel disempowered, and it goes both ways. I'm just talking about it from the point of view from product because that's my area. And likewise, design and engineering rely on product for the prioritization piece, for understanding what does the roadmap look like, what's the direction we're heading in. Together, that created a very strong trifecta where we were able to deliver a lot within the timelines with high quality.
I was wondering about your personal favorite tips and procedures that you do to ensure the product development efficiency from the very beginning and on all layers, from stakeholders down to the product teams and, of course, the customers.
Yes. And you're right. It's easy to get caught up in having something be perfect, right? We all want to have everything be good all of the time, but focusing your energy on where it's really going to drive that success. And honestly, in addition to success metrics, looking for a scope document. So what is going to be in scope of this product build, and defining that upfront during your discovery, like you mentioned, talking with stakeholders. In that example too, where in my scope document, if I said I want to be able to schedule an appointment in under 1 minute, but I don't do that discovery, I don't talk to my internal team, can the technology even support that? Maybe the technology is through a third-party vendor. I need to get them engaged. Is that something that we're able to do? Defining that scope is going to help you get to your success. And it will help you stay focused too, right? Because it's easy to, after discovery, say, oh, what about this? Or I want to add this. And now all of a sudden you have, a car with heated seats and a sunroof and all of these things. And you said, that's not what I needed. I needed a vehicle to get me from point A to point B. That's what's in my scope. So a scope document is really helpful to set up front.
Nick, what are your personal kind of like advice on, or I should say rather, like pieces of advice on building and growing the right product team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I've had the opportunity, luckily, to help manage, grow, and develop people across my time. First, it was more of an indirect way in my consulting role at Cerner, and then later in a more formal, manager style fashion for the Open API program and in other parts of the Cerner business. And so one of the things that, in terms of like suggestions or advice, one of the things I always like to do is orient towards like diversity of skill set. Mm-hmm. I have a fundamental belief that it is a requirement to avoid tunnel vision and like echo chamber type activity to have folks with various different ecosystems and backgrounds and perspectives. Mm-hmm. And if you're really truly building like a dynamic team, you want folks that have some healthy level of friction about their perspective on how to solve a problem, such that you can then aggregate the best insights from those various perspectives into an actionable strategy going forward. So, I've hired clinicians in the past, like former clinicians. I've worked with actuaries, converted engineers. Like I typically look for folks with a variety of background and skill sets. I kind of fundamentally believe that product is two-sided. It's both an art and science. And I'm fundamentally convinced you can definitely train and teach somebody the science side of it. But the art side of it is where you get kind of that diverse perspectives. And I don't know that side necessarily can be taught, nor should it. But I like the opportunity to like cultivate teams that have the ability to apply their own style. We might give a rough framework of what we're trying to do or how we're going to do what we're going to do in product, but the individual flavor, the execution, I like to, populate folks with different backgrounds and then put them together and see what cream will rise to the top. That's essentially my best advice there.
How would you approach building such a product development team, given that there are different personas to work with and they might offer their, different skills and perspectives for the product?
Yeah, it's complex. Definitely one place that we start is that we have increased our ability to have more specialization, especially over the last year, and get more, we've definitely had a need for more gnarly technical, heavy back-end minded people like the Google engineers of the world. So that has increased. But in general, every contributor to our product team, whether that is an engineer, a designer, or a product manager, as some of our three main goals. And from design, we have both product design and content design. All of them have to play within the gray area between the roles. There is no boundary lines. There is an overlap. And the more you can overlap and the more you can be business minded to understand the whys and collaboratively discuss what problem you're trying to solve, the more beneficial it's going to be towards effective teamwork as well as optimizing outcomes. So at Carrot, we interview for that across all facets, that we can make sure that they understand the other roles, such as engineers go through a product requirements exercise. So that's great for having a diverse team, but each team only has one product manager. So we have several teams, and each one having an assigned product manager. And then on the product manager side, we look for their motivations to match with the outcomes that those teams are targeted, whether they're more complex and gnarly in nature or focusing more on like the innovation engagement side of things. And so we try to both target and match those, I guess, archetypes to the teams correctly.
I was wondering about the your definition of KPI, the things that you're working on that kind of like define your work in terms of the product success for a stakeholder that might not be necessarily in context of what you do day to day. So we can take a look at things and say, hey, you know what, this manager is really going after it.
So I feel like KPIs are key to bring alignment in different teams, especially now that I'm product lead and I have a few teams. I want to make sure that they have a clear KPI that they can work toward, and this guides them. And when they have prioritization questions, they don't need leadership or anyone like on a daily basis, because the metric will tell them what they need to work on, right?
Right.
As long as you choose like a good metric and that is easily understandable by the team. So people need to have access to this KPI. They need to make sure that they can access it on a daily basis and that it helps them making decisions. So those are like, for me, the most important things about having KPIs, and that they don't change frequently, which is harder in an environment like ours at the moment. Like the whole tech industry had a lot of difficulties lately, but I would say that if possible, KPIs should not change frequently.
What are the things that you typically suggest and give advice to people about like making yourself such a scarce specialist that is always resilient?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to my like original point about just finding the things that make you different and really leaning into them. Mm-hmm. So for me, the fact that my parents were healthcare providers meant that I, had a perspective on a given stakeholder and user that was really intimate and kind of went beyond that. And that was something I leaned into. The fact that I was well-versed in policy meant that at Athena, I was sort of like jumping up and down to kind of get opportunities to flex that. And like even during my time at Oscar, I sometimes sort of will help a little bit with work on the interoperability requirements, not necessarily because it's like directly in my scope of work, but it's because I know something about it. I think it's just, and in my time at Manifest MedX in the nonprofit space, like I was coming directly out of business school with, I think, a really, a sort of private sector mindset, if you will, of like, we really need to prove out our value proposition, our market positioning, and all of these things that, had not always been directly top of mind in a nonprofit as well. And so I think it's about like, in any given environment, find what makes you different and really lean into it. And, my time at Oscar, that's of course been the sort of B2B background that, I was brought on for. And I think that's the first piece. And I think, the second is to be confident in the value of that difference. And I remember, when I was had started like a couple months in at my time at Oscar, and I was just like, I really had a pretty strong sense of imposter syndrome, right? Of like kind of playing in this more like lead role that I hadn't had before. And, I'd never even been a product manager, let alone like any sort of like product lead, and all of a sudden I was kind of in this role, like expected to lead, and our chief product officer at the time, I was kind of talking to her about like, how do you think about like ways to overcome that? And what she said was remarkably simple, which is just like, if you were not the right person for this role, like somebody else would be in it and they're not. And I think to just like remind yourself of that, like on a daily basis, is really like important. And I think, there's a lot of things around kind of like confidence that are much more complicated than that. But I think just the simplicity of that statement and just the extremely factual nature of it really appealed to me.
What would be your, I guess, just one tip to product managers out there that you personally would probably tell to your younger self, and you were like, damn, I wish I knew that when I was like at a management role, for instance?
It's kind of tricky because I don't know if my younger self was as empowered as the industry is today. But my tip would be the industry has evolved a lot, and don't like when it comes to product management and product development. This might sound wrong, but don't be novel. There is plenty of like processes and definitions of a PRD and how, like all of those pieces. Allow yourself to be a little bit boring there on how you establish your frameworks so that you can be novel with your product and not be distracted on how you build things, but actually be distracted on what you build. So that's the one that comes to mind. Oh, do retros. That's a big one to me too. It's amazing how many things are resolved if you actually protect space, where the entire objective of that space you protect is to reflect and give each other feedback. And it's also ridiculously easy to not protect that time. But it's also easy to protect that time. Like it's so crazy how that works, that teams, if the time is protected, will just continuously improve. They get that Kaizen culture. But everyone's always, we're all so busy. So it's so easy to just move on to the next thing and then not allow like a process feedback loop into how the team worked.
What are your sort of like guidelines?
When it comes to making a decision for product, I feel like the answer should always be, what's the best thing for the customer? If you follow that path, then and use that as your guiding light, then you'll end up with a good strategy. I think that question is very different from the previous question, which was, how do you get along with others, or how do you build strong relationships?
Yeah.
So something a person I worked with, who I respect very much, said, when he was going through the interview process, then a lot of the things, or when he was interviewing others for roles, not when he was hiring others, not being hired, but a lot of the things they were looking at when they give someone a problem is not to see what the solution is, but what they wanted to see is, how does the person listen to questions, or do they just take the question and answer it, or do they try to see, hey, is there anything that they want me to address, but they're not actually saying, and to try to understand the why behind what's being asked. I think for someone whose job it is to manage people and to get buy-in, it's important to understand how people work, how people think, what drives people. That is going to be essential into understanding how to make them feel valued, how to make them feel rewarded, how to help them make them feel supported. Some people will appreciate going through every word in a presentation and they'll feel supported that way. Someone else might feel like, why are you micromanaging me? Get off my back. So as a manager, you'd want to know that balance and to be able to support your team where they need help the most. It's important to give people what they need and to understand their needs. But the other thing that I think is very important is to establish trust, so that your team trusts you to listen to them and to represent them and to fight for them. And you trust them to do their best work and to come to you when they have issues. Because the last thing you want as a manager is for your team to be scared of you, and if something is going wrong and you don't know about it, and then everything explodes in your face. you want them to feel safe to you and to say, hey, this is going wrong. And that's when I help them resolve it. Because ultimately, I hire people to do work. I don't want to do the work for them. And what I'm there for is to fix problems when they're there.
How do you pivot successfully in times of uncertainty where certain KPIs were the goal, but then the things changed and now you have to pivot? So what is, I guess, your take on the right mindset to approach that change and how you communicate that change to the teams that you're working with?
First of all, I think it's important to take a step back and reflect, right? Some products or features would still make sense, even if the KPI is different. You need to kind of like reevaluate everything you worked on, but also kind of like open it up for like new things that might move the needle much more. So I think you need to kind of like take a step back, think about what will move the needle. Do you have plans? Do you need to do some discovery beforehand?
Right.
Because sometimes it's not like, okay, now it's a new metric, go. You don't know what to do, what will actually work. I think communicating to teams, I learn it all the time that you need to communicate frequently and consistently across the board. So to make sure that sometimes you kind of like assume people understand, but they weren't in all of the meetings and they didn't hear the CTO talk about this or that.
Oh, yeah,
so
right.
You are the one that needs to communicate it to them and make sure that they understand the reasoning and they are bought into it. And if some things are not yet well structured, because when you shift, there is a lot of ambiguity in life. You need to be transparent about it and kind of like take people on this journey of like helping this ambiguity becomes clarity. But you need to ask them to help you in this and not expect you to do all of the, of course you have a role in this, but you need to make sure that everybody coming together to do this, to give this clarity.
You were also talking about outcomes versus outputs. Can you elaborate on that topic in a little more context with regards to Carrot?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, what are we talking about with outcomes and outputs? Good to give them a quick definition. When I think of an output, it is like the result of a project. So it's the completion of it. It's the establishment of a feature. It's the fact that it's live. An outcome would be feature adoption and understanding the actual usage of that. So we may have a hypothesis and we may drive that. We'll go back earlier to that central navigation point. We'll talk about that carrot plan because that is a team that's settled and more focused on outcomes. We may believe that maybe we didn't have articles linked. And now we're saying that we believe that direct linking, hyperlinking to an article from the plan will increase the amount of completed article readings by 20%. And that'll be our hypothesis. The output is that we hyperlink those articles. The outcome comes, over 3 to 6 weeks later to start to track and understand if we did indeed influence those engagement metrics. And we'll look back and reflect on that. And that would be more outcomes oriented in that example.
As a product manager, you have a say when it comes to hiring a new person in a team, and you get feedback from the whole team because they would be working with that person. I was wondering what are the key qualities that you are looking for in a candidate yourself, and what are the things that you kind of like mark as red flags? And it doesn't mean necessarily that the person is bad or anything. It just means that it's not a good fit for the cultivated product team.
Yes. So I would say there's a handful of things. One is in the world that I'm in, you do need some skill, right? So having that education and experience background, that can really be helpful. But from a culture perspective, what I also look for is not is being positive in your approach. So really don't talk bad about your previous company. Don't talk bad about another vendor or another competitor that's out there. At the end of the day, we're all just trying to accomplish the same thing and help members get better care, right? And so if I'm talking to someone and interviewing them, and I ask them, oh, why are you leaving? That's a very basic common question. Or why are you looking to leave? And if their response is filled with things like, I'm having a hard time with working with my peers, or nobody is listening to my great ideas, or, if we just merged with a company that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with, those sort of things, those are going to be kind of some negative, I'd say, red flags for me, because that's not going to get anywhere if you talk badly about someone or something else. I really look for that strong, positive culture of, you know what, things happen and we just go. And so, yes, I could have experienced a difficult coworker, but here's how I learned, here's how I'm moving forward, and here's how that's helped me in the future. And that, I say, that is the biggest thing when looking, is that cultural fit.
Being a data analyst, can you share some of the practical tips on avoiding analysis paralysis as a product manager? I felt like data analysts have like an innate ability of operating a little bit better in when it comes to ambiguity, but you've corrected me on this, and I'm curious to let everybody know your perspective on this. So yeah.
So I think that sometimes like having too much data is also dangerous, right? Because you can always display numbers in a way that makes your decision correct. Not always, but in a lot of cases. So it's important to understand that not making a decision is also a decision. So sometimes we are delaying a decision because we don't have enough data, or we want to collect more or learn another thing. But while we are not making a decision, like the industry changes, a new competitor comes in town, our users have different needs. So it's really important to understand that as well. And if you have a success metric in advance that you always measure and how are you doing, that should make you successful in this journey, I hope.
Professional success criteria that you personally stand by. Principles of your success as a product owner.
So principles of my success as a product owner, I would say, again, is getting down to that net promoter score. Is what I am doing beneficial? So I could be working on something and thinking I'm doing a great job, and the revenue looks good and I think everyone's happy. But if I can't produce what the needs of the industry are, that's not going to be a success for me. I want, at the end of the day, all the way through, right, that member gets the care that they need. So the health plan now is able to be financially rewarded, and they are satisfied with the technology of our products that we're able to provide for them. So that I would say really defines the success, is all the way through, all the way downstream. Did the product do what it's meant to do, and did it do it well?
Thank you for watching this Care Minds podcast episode. Let us know in the comment section which product tip was your favorite. We're constantly looking for new topics to cover on this channel, so let us know what kind of content you would like to see in our next episodes. Hope you enjoyed this one. Until next time.